Okay, so it's good to be back with my friend Lois Cookie Green. She's head of that great stuttering group on Facebook called From Stuttering to Confidence. I'm Larry Stein, Stein on Stuttering, and this is our almost weekly little chat where Cookie asks me a question that's come up in her group. So go ahead, Cookie.
So it is always good to be back and talk to you. Now, my question today is a good one, and that is, how do you handle fear with presentations? How are you not fearful? Tell me about that.
Well, I wouldn't say I'm not fearful, but doing presentations was actually how I started to make progress with my speech. And I had to be talked into becoming the president of this very small nonprofit, not a paid position.
Yeah.
The only people they had who wanted to do it were in their 80s. And I kept on turning them down. I turned them down 3 times, and finally I gave in. And the reason I was that I didn't want to do it was, number one, I'd had to lead board meetings of like 20 or 30 people, and this was before I had really made my big improvement in my speech. My speech improved over the years. I was probably in my early 50s at this time. And so this is about 4 or 5 years before I really made my big improvement. And then my real fear was also, I knew I would have to do maybe 4 or 5 little 5-10 minute presentations.
Yeah.
Some of them would have over 100 people in them, but mostly 100 people, 150. And the last time I had given a presentation was 30 years before that. It was a 10-minute presentation that took me 28 minutes. So you can imagine how badly I stuttered. and so I did not want to repeat that. But so when it came time to give my first presentation, I already had a bunch of board meetings under my belt. And that wasn't like giving a presentation, but sort of. And I kind of harkened back to my little speech therapy days when I was a kid. That they taught me how to phrase. And I never used it outside of therapy. It didn't help me. But for some reason, and I don't know, it wasn't planned, but I guess I'd watched some public speakers and they seemed to phrase. So I said, okay, I'll phrase. And so I did that. And the other thing I did was I was so nervous. I mean, I was, in the bathroom for the 15 minutes before they were going to call me on to speak. And I just, on a whim, I just did the opposite. And I just played around up there. And I'll never forget, I was looking out at the crowd, and in the past I would freeze and couldn't say a word. And I saw a friend on the right side who has this wonderful smile, and I began looking at her. And then I looked in the middle and I saw my cousin was in the audience. She's the one who actually brought me on the board. And she was smiling at me. And I looked at my wife on the left side, and so I broke this group of 150 people down to 3 people.
Oh.
Left, middle, right.
Mm-hmm.
And I continued to do that. Left, middle, right. And I just was focusing on these people smiling at me, and that helped. But what really, got me, and
that thought.
And so doing presentations began to become my way forward in terms of improving my speech. But how I worked through the fear, so after doing many presentations, some of which were paid presentations to groups of CEOs over the last few years. And I remember even just 2 years ago, there was an opening during COVID where people were seeing each other in person again, a little bit. This is up in Minneapolis. They were paying me to give three-hour presentations to groups of CEOs.
Yeah.
And you're supposed to use it with no notes. And so I had this kind of worked out in my mind, no notes. I kind of learned this memory system. It's called the Memory Palace. And so I knew my speech. And it would go on for 3 hours. So, but I hadn't done one in person. I had done them on Zoom quite a bit, but I hadn't done one in person during COVID for, it was probably close to 2 years. And as I walked in the room, I flew to Minneapolis, and I'm driving to the presentation, I'm getting a little nervous. And as I'm walking through the door to deliver the first presentation, I'm getting nervous. And so as you know, my mechanics in speaking is breathe, emphasize, phrase. And I just did that from watching professional broadcasters, professional speakers, and simplifying how they talk. They take a breath before, and then they speak on the exhale. They speak in phrases, and they'll emphasize a word for the end of the phrase, use up their breath, and they'll do the same. They speak phrase to phrase to phrase. And that's what good speakers do. They also speak story to story to story, by the way. But anyways, so I had those mechanics, and those are in me. I've practiced them so much, I don't think about it at all. But I found myself nervous, and I was questioning, could I do this again in front of people? I was really questioning it. And this is what I do. And this is what I do whenever I'm nervous, because we're all going to be nervous at some point. Life happens, things happen in our lives, difficult times rise up and you're not expecting them. How do you respond? This is how I respond. I shorten my phrases. I am more expressive. I emphasize even stronger. And by shortening my phrases, I'm breathing more. And by breathing more and taking more of a full breath, the oxygen is moving.
Yes.
I picture my breathing like a fountain. The air is coming up from my diaphragm, coming out my mouth. The words are on top of it, and it's just moving. And I can't calm myself in the moment. In a really high pressure moment, I can't calm myself. I can do it privately. I'm great at that. But I don't think you can possibly calm yourself in the moment. But you can calm yourself by doing stuff. And this is what I do. And so I began my presentation with something like, how did I do this? How did I go from that to this? And how can you, and on and on like that.
Right.
Short, declarative phrases, very expressive, and within 30 seconds, maybe a minute, I was back on track, feeling good, because all that air is just moving. It's just moving. I'm expressive. I'm putting my energy on the crowd rather than on me.
Right.
And I'm breathing so much, and that's how I work through nervousness. But how do you do your first presentation, right? I mean, how do you do your first presentation? Which for many people, they're being called upon to do that. And I mentor a lot of people, And I suggested to them, after they get to a certain point where they're feeling good about the speech, to join a Toastmasters group. Toastmasters is a nice, easy place to practice,
Right.
and that's helped a lot of people who I work with. But how do you do the first one? And the key for me was to do the opposite. That's the key for everything that I do psychologically. Do the opposite. So you're going to be up there. You're going to be nervous. Nothing you can do. You can say I'm going to be confident, but that's
Doesn't
not the
happen.
reality. Reality is you're going to be nervous. The
Yes.
first time you're going to be nervous, and of course you know your material, and of course you've practiced. But the real thing is, what do you do when you get up there, right? Because you are going to be nervous.
Right.
And so I have my mechanics. I speak in short phrases, and usually I'll ask a question like that. You know, how did I do this? How did I go from that to this? And at the same time, whatever the presentation is, I am somewhat playing to the crowd. And my focus is on them.
Right.
And as much as I can, I'm going to do things that are opposite to my nervousness inclination. So one of my favorite things to do was to kind of midway through a presentation, I would make a big point, and then I would pause and see how long it would take for someone to get fidgety in the crowd.
Oh, okay.
And when when I noticed someone getting a little, what's he doing up there? Then I would continue. But just by doing the opposite of things, your inclination is to speak fast and try and get it over with. No, speak slowly, short phrases, breathe a lot, and be very expressive. And so for your first presentation, just keep thinking, do the opposite, rather than be scared. And you're nervous, but you can still enjoy it. And if you just if you just keep thinking the opposite and just enjoy it, and just, like in every conversation I say, and this is a conversation, you do two things. Number one, enjoy. And number two, give to the crowd. And you're giving whatever information you're giving to them. So your focus is on them, not on this. And maybe that'll help some people. Because giving presentations, if you think about it, should be the easiest thing you do as a speaker. You know the material, you know how much time you have. No one is going to interrupt you. You could do anything you want up there. And if there is a time limit, let's say it's 10 minutes, I prepare 7 minutes of material because I want the flexibility to play around up there, make a joke here and there. Humor is a very great release for me. And so that's what I do. You are going to be nervous, but if you do the opposite, use humor, breathing, have fun, focus on them. It's a wonderful experience.
I think that was powerful. Yes. Thank you. Oh.
All right.
Yes.
Cookie, always a pleasure to talk with you.
Yes, it's such a pleasure. Yeah.
Look forward to next week. I can't wait for your next question.
Thank you.
All right. We'll talk soon. Take care.
Bye-bye.